Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Had a nice break. Maybe had some water, some tea, some coffee, whatever stimulant or depressant might make you feel good at this point. So we are just going to get started here pretty soon. This next panel is called Psychedelic Medicalization, Unpacking the Landscape of Drug Development and Commercialization. So we're very excited to have all of you here. Just amazing that there's more than 1,200 people are participating in these 3 tracks right now, and that we're all around the world and we can all be together at the same time. So I'm Zara. I'll be moderating kind of the next 2 panels, although they're going to have their own moderators too. Hi, Bia. So nice to have you here. We've been having some great conversations. We had an amazing panel a minute ago with Aliyah and Aliyah. I don't know how to say her name correctly. I just say Aliyah because it's the 90s. Aliyah and Amy. And it was really excellent panel. Okay, so I think we'll just get started. Since we like to be on time here, I like to respect everyone's time. We are very excited about this panel, and we're going to first have 3 presentations, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers. So the first presentation is going to be by Dr. Victoria Hale, who is a pharmaceutical scientist and executive, and she's a global health social entrepreneur, as well as a member of the board of directors of MAPS. She's been the founder and CEO of 2 successful nonprofit pharmaceutical companies, One World Health and Medicines 360. And One World Health was the first nonprofit pharmaceutical company in the US focused on leishmaniasis, malaria, and cholera. And Meds 360 developed a hormonal IUD for contraception. So she has just kind of been at the lead of it all. In addition to that, she's a MacArthur Fellow. So we are in the presence of genius, and was inducted into the U.S. National Academy of Medicine, has been recognized as an outstanding global social entrepreneur by Skoll, Ashoka, and Schwab Foundations. And she has a PhD from UCSF and is also a professor, an adjunct professor of bioengineering and experimental therapeutics at UCSF. So we are very excited to have her here to share all of her experience. And we're looking forward to also getting questions in the question bar. And just getting this show on the road. So, Victoria, if you are ready, you can unmute yourself. Hi.
Hi.
There you are. Nice to see you.
You too. It's been a great day.
It's been a great day. I mean, I had my doubts about a virtual conference because so much of conferences are just like seeing and being in people's energy. And it is amazing that we are able to even transmit that when it's a screen. So I'm really excited and we're really happy to have you here. So I'm going to let you take over, and I'm going to take a step back off the stage. And thank you so much for being here today. And if there are any quirks with it as we go, we just keep rolling with it. So
Sure.
Thanks a lot.
No, it looks good. Thank you. Yeah. So I am a drug developer, and I love making medicines. What has driven me in my career is that these medicines be ideal for what we need in society. And it's really the mental health crisis that we have not only in this country, but around the world. And we have a multiplier on that now because of coronavirus, the pandemic, and our living and working and economic situations. So these medicines are needed more than ever. So I'll speak just for 5 minutes or so about FDA and drug development and my experience. So I worked at FDA for 5 years, and it was a beautiful experience to be within FDA. Since that time, I've been working with FDA and other regulatory agencies on the other side of the table. And I would like to say just a couple of things about drug development. The first is that I believe that our psychedelic medicine development is going beautifully. really beautifully. One thing that we look for is a partnership type relationship. And from what I can see, I know the most about MAPS's MDMA, which we had panelists earlier, Alia and Amy, speaking about that. I know a little bit about psilocybin, and I'm consulting with an ayahuasca company as well. So beautiful, beautiful partnership sets the stage for real open communication. There is within FDA a mandate from Congress to be sure first that medicines are safe. And people are confused a little bit or upset about the requirements of FDA to study these medicines in animals. And it just happens to be that most pharmaceuticals have been chemicals up till this time that most medicines have. And the FDA developed in that way. And we have experimental models and safety studies that can be performed, pharmacology and toxicology within animal models. So those are generally done first. We have larger and more complicated, more expensive animal model studies that follow, such as reproductive toxicology or carcinogenicity studies. So doing those in order is important. The later stage studies are more expensive, and that is just something that needs to be done. Working in psychedelic medicines is an interesting situation for all of us, including the FDA. And I pose to you that we've done this medicine work backwards from the way that FDA has normally done drug development work. And that is in a laboratory first, then in animals, and then in people. But as we all know, these medicines came to people first. So we are in a process where we need to work backwards for FDA and sort of fill in the gaps and connect the dots and align and line up with the way traditional chemical medicines are developed. So that's what we're doing. The cost of medicine development, you can read studies on this because it is very expensive, anywhere from, let's say, $100 million to $2 billion. And you need to read the fine print in terms of how the calculations were done there. I think that we'll be in approximately the 100 million range in our medicines because of the indications that we are working with and the partnerships with FDA. Beyond the safety, early considerations in animals and then moving into phase 1 clinical trials, we needed to overcome a general appreciation or belief even that these medicines were not safe and caused harm. And that takes a little bit of time and nuancing. And I pose to you that through working with FDA and bringing along first MDMA, which is an amphetamine class type molecule, which FDA knows brings a lot of comfort to FDA. It was a great first choice for this entire field. Psilocybin, similarly coming along in 2 different organizations, and we'll see what the next few molecules are. We move into phase 2 trials, which are preliminary efficacy. So safety needs to be done in tens of people or dozens. You shouldn't need to expand too much beyond that, and then you can go into early efficacy studies. And those phase 2 trials can be done in tens again, more like high tens or 100 total is a good number. And depending on what you find, a lot of companies are exploring efficacy in phase 2 and deciding on which indication to pursue. Then you would choose one and fund that primarily and move into phase 3 trials. And in my experience, FDA wants to see hundreds of patients with efficacy data with the indication that you're pursuing, that we are pursuing. That is going very well, so well. The phase 2 trial results were so good that FDA has given breakthrough therapy designation, right, to not only to MDMA for PTSD, but to psilocybin for the various types of depression that's being pursued. And that is a beautiful outcome. It doesn't get better than that. So I pose to you that drug development with psychedelic medicines is going very well. It does cost tens or let's call it $100 million to bring one forward. And it's hard to reduce it below that. We need to work with FDA and have a great relationship with the first indication and with the first exploration of safety, so that when other indications come along, we're also blessed with these molecules, in that we have, with each of the companies and nonprofits that are working here, multiple indications planned. So it is drug development with FDA can really be a good experience. And I pose that when bad experiences happen, I often hear people on the outside say, well, FDA and fill in the blank, something negative. I pose to you that there's a lot more to the story that FDA can't necessarily share. And it's often the case as well that companies that present data don't necessarily do it in the most clear way, or let's say didn't follow FDA's requests, or, you didn't exactly do what FDA wanted you to do. And it's good to do that if you want to get through in the shortest way. So a few more years and we'll have these beautiful molecules on the market. I look forward to, in this talk, and then I'll finish up, I look forward to moving beyond drug development discussions. I think things are going so well in this field that it's really time that we begin to look to accessibility and impact and scale. How do we move these molecules forward through the various commercialization venues? And hope to talk as well about therapists, because all of these medicines, we need to remember, are for medicine-assisted psychotherapy for these psychiatric indications.
Thank you so much. We're getting some good questions here. I want to ask one, just because it's just to you and it won't make sense. You said you were consulting with an ayahuasca company, quotations, working with the FDA. What company is that? Can you just give us a minute or two on what that means?
Sure. Yeah, the company is named Standish Medicine, and Dr. Leanna Standish founded the company a few years ago. She's based in Seattle, Washington, and she filed the IND for ayahuasca in 2016 with the FDA.
Great. Okay, excellent. So we're going to be bringing you back up after the next two presentations for then the panel part of the discussion. But thank you so much for sharing your experience. I mean, it's very hopeful what you just told us. So that's great news of that. If it's going in the right direction with your experience, you've seen what it takes. And we're moving in that correct space. So the next person that we're going to hear from today is Ronan Levy. He's an entrepreneur and co-founder and executive chairman of Field Trip Psychedelics Incorporated. He's also a partner at Grass-Fed Ventures, which is a venture capital and advisory firm focused on the cannabis and biotech industries. He co-founded Canadian Cannabis Clinics and Canvas RX Incorporated, the latter of which was acquired by Aurora Cannabis Company in 2016. He holds a Juris Doctor and a Bachelor of Commerce degree, both from the University of Toronto. So probably hailing from Canada right now. We have all of North America represented. And thank you for being with us, Ronan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Zara. Thank you, everyone, for having me. And it's really wonderful to be here. So as mentioned, I'm the executive chairman and one of the co-founders of Field Trip. At Field Trip, our mission is really to bring the world to life through psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. As everyone on this conference probably knows, we're having a bit of a psychedelic renaissance happening right now. I think this is happening for a few reasons. In part, I think cannabis has really helped change minds around once stigmatized medicine. I think mental health has become a very important topic du jour in our society, and both from a public health perspective. And as Victoria mentioned, we have a mental health crisis happening around the world, with 1 in 5 people likely to experience some sort of mental health challenge at some point in their lives. And when you look at the evidence around psychedelics and their use and the MAP studies, as well as the academic studies on psilocybin and beyond, the evidence for psychedelics is quite persuasive and quite strong. So it's not surprising this is all coming together now. However, notwithstanding the excitement and the safety profile and the efficacy of psychedelics, as well as their understanding, there are going to be challenges that come along with trying to bring psychedelic medicine to people, bring it to scale, help the most people access these medicines. And that's really what we're trying to focus on at Field Trip. And we're taking a kind of a 2-tiered approach to that. The first is really focusing on providing the clinical infrastructure to provide psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. 4 of the 5 founders in Field Trip came from the Canadian medical cannabis industry. And while the rollout of medical cannabis or adult use cannabis has been far from perfect, one of the things we did learn through our experience there was 2 things, actually. One is just how profoundly impactful cannabis and by extension plant-based medicines can be on the quality of life of a number of people suffering with a number of chronic conditions. And secondly, that the rollout of psychedelics, much like cannabis, is going to require a new set of infrastructure that we believe right now the clinical infrastructure just doesn't exist to provide this kind of care to people on a large number basis. And so that's why at Field Trip, our primary focus right now is building a clinic network designed to provide psychedelic enhanced psychotherapy to a large number of people, really starting from the ground up, both in terms of designing our clinics to make sure that it's a wonderful setting, safe, warm, comfortable, but at the same time, efficiently designed to make sure that we can provide care to people on the most cost-effective basis that we can, given that psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is so high touch point and so labor-intensive. It really requires a lot of thought about how we can provide this care to people on a significant basis. The other piece that we're working on at Field Trip is more conventional drug development. Just a couple of weeks ago, we announced Field Trip Discovery, which is our drug development arm. And that's backed by a number of really credentialed people who have come through conventional drug development, but who see the potential of psychedelics to treat any number of mental health conditions. And while the research and the studies on MDMA and psilocybin are amazing and wonderful and exciting, the truth is that MDMA and psilocybin are only 2 options, and we know that there are countless other psychedelics which may have different values for people in treating different patients and different conditions, that psilocybin and MDMA are not perfect for every mental health condition that exists. And so there's a need to invest in other research around other molecules, whether plant-based or synthetic, that really provide a psychedelic experience. And I should note that at Field Trip, we firmly believe in the importance of the psychedelic experience. We know that there are groups out there who are trying to take psychedelic molecules and remove the psychedelic experience from them to make them much more conventional, look a lot more like antidepressants. But our philosophy is that it's the process, that the drugs are just a catalyst for the psychotherapy, and that you have to do the work. You can't just let the medicine do the work for you for real effective change. And that's really core to our philosophy. So we're investing in conventional drug development. We're developing our strategy right now. But we also, touching on one of the points that I think Victoria spoke about, was we also think that even though the FDA process in Canada, Health Canada process is one that's very laudable, it's a structure that was developed by a lot of incredibly intelligent people who really focus on developing protocols and structures to make sure that medicines are safe and effective. Those systems, those processes are necessarily rigid. They're necessarily imperfect because of the attention to detail, because of the structure that they provide. And so in addition to our investment in conventional drug development, we're also investing in understanding the plants themselves. And that's why we entered into a joint partnership with the University of West Indies in Jamaica to build what we believe to be the world's first legal research and cultivation facility for psilocybin producing mushrooms. And the goal there is really twofold. One is anticipating that you may see a market for the mushrooms emerge as opposed to the synthetics of psilocybin. We want to get buckled up in understanding the cultivation techniques so we can provide large-scale cultivation of psilocybin-producing mushrooms if a market does emerge, and hopefully bypass some of the challenges that cannabis has had growing in a large scale environment in a compliant way that meets all analytical testing requirements. And then secondly, we believe that there's an entourage effect that exists within psilocybin producing mushrooms, that the experience on consuming the fungal biomass as opposed to taking a synthetic is going to be different. And in fact, you see the first evidence starting to emerge about how certain molecules in mushrooms will actually modulate the receptor binding of the psilocin in the brain. And so we want to invest further into understanding what those molecules are, if there are other molecules that are of interest that may help develop new drugs or new formulations to make sure that we have the most robust offering of products available to people who need these kind of medicines. So that's what we're doing at Field Trip. We're incredibly excited by it. We recognize the challenge of it. We're trying to do it as consciously as possible, recognizing that sometimes capitalism can create perverse incentives. And so we've set ourselves up as a triple bottom line corporation. We will eventually seek B Corp status as well. But right now, B Labs doesn't actually certify any psychedelics company, so we couldn't achieve that. But we're really trying to do it on a really thoughtful, ethical basis. It's core to who we are, even though we are a for-profit entity. So with that, that's a little bit about Field Trip. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to being part of this discussion.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Ronan. So now we're going to be, and don't worry, at the end, we're really going to get to all these questions because there are some really good ones that are coming up in the question. And I encourage people who are chatting on the chat to put your questions in the Ask a Question, because that's really going to be the main place for to be able to take on questions. So the next person we're going to invite to the stage is Greg Kearns. He is a healthcare strategist with over 16 years of progressive leadership experience within not-for-profit health systems. He recently founded Fourth Road Health, which aims to assist stakeholders in the psychedelic community as they develop the infrastructure necessary for the successful integration of psychedelic medicines into the existing healthcare systems. So it's going to be interesting. How do we really bring in psychedelics into the current systems that we already have in our countries? So welcome, Greg, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I am really happy to be here today. And I think where I'm going to be starting is a little bit more on the philosophical level. And that's getting into what are we really grappling with here? What's really at the heart of this issue around the tension that I think exists in this space as it relates to, what are the appropriate business models for us to be looking at, whether that's a for-profit model, a not-for-profit model, or, any kind of various structures that are going to go one way or the other in those various ideas. And as I was preparing for my talk, I found myself really thinking back on my own experience working in not-for-profit healthcare. And for the majority of my career, I've actually worked in Catholic healthcare. So healthcare that's sponsored by women religious, and specifically the Sisters of Bon Secours. And it just so happens that one of my closest mentors, a Catholic priest, reached out to me a few weeks ago and shared with me that he was kind of blown away that my two worlds were colliding in the February 2020 issue of Health Progress, which is the journal of the Catholic Health Association of the United States. And the first article that he called and was super surprised to find in that journal was titled, "Do Marijuana and Psychedelics Merit Greater Scientific Study?" And I'm not here to talk about that article today, but the one that I am here to talk about is the one that Father Joe Driscoll wrote. And that was titled, "Laser Focus on Charism for Ministry to Thrive." And so in this article, what Father Joe really started to talk about was that he was posing an argument that for Catholic healthcare ministries to survive, they have to look beyond their mission, they have to look beyond their vision, they have to look behind their values, because those are not what differentiates them. Instead, they need to be laser focused on charism, because that's what makes them distinctive. And so I'm actually going to go a little bit on a dive down into what charism means, because I think there's some really fascinating parallels to the psychedelic community. And I'm going to ask for your forgiveness here, because I'm actually going to read some excerpts from the article, because I think Father Joe just wrote it really, really well. So bear with me here for a second. So charism, as it has developed in the history of the church, is fourfold. It is the vivifying presence and the gift of the Holy Spirit, given to a founder of a ministry to meet a specific need in time and circumstances that attracts others. The movement of the Spirit is unique and specific to the story. A community's charism is not discerned immediately, but only upon reflection in the telling and retelling of the originating story. A charism is not a definition of a carefully constructed plan, but a description of a spontaneously faith-uncovered mystery. Living and working from charism is a conscious, intentional, prayerful act of an individual ministry leaders joined together in a ministry community. Without charism or Holy Spirit consciousness, there is the danger that the classic tension between the mission and the business will deepen its divide. There should be no divide. Charism facilitates this constant stepping back reflectively to look at the forming of a relationship, primarily the relationship of God calling and our responding to that call. That in turn informs the process of living everything we do as a ministry community, transforming the world in a mission that is spirit initiated, sustained, and promised into a future. The power of charism consciousness is that it forms relationships and a shared calling, informs the process of living out a shared ministry, and transforms a world in a shared mission. So what does this mean for the ministry leader? What is required is a conscious, intentional discipline of starting from one's own spirituality and spiritual practices so as to concretely and specifically discern where and how the Spirit is moving in the daily operations of the ministry, and trusting that Spirit and calling upon that Spirit in her or his leadership. People in the ministry are conscious and explicit in their awareness, understandings, and appreciation that the Holy Spirit brings unity and diversity and order within chaos in its shared mission to the world. And so I read this and I found myself just being like, this is what the psychedelic community is grappling with right now. We are all grappling with this understanding that, we've been called to this work. And every day, more and more people are arriving. And there's a lot of new actors, and we're having to understand, who are they? What are their intentions? And are they holding this work in the same way that we are holding it? And so as I think back on my time in Catholic healthcare, I've spent 13 of the past 16 years working in Catholic healthcare. I think about what formation did they actually, make sure that I went through to make sure that I could really live out their ministry. And so that starts with the story, understanding, the deep history of the ministry. And so in that case, in the Sisters of Bon Secours, we understood the story of their founder, Sister Josephine Patel, and the first 12 women in Paris right after the French Revolution that went out and started caring for people in their homes. Because, hospitals were really not the place to be receiving care at that time. Nearly 200 years later, that ministry has ministries in 4 continents, including the US, where they're operating 45 hospitals in 7 states. And the only way they're able to do that is they have shared that ministry with lay people, but they haven't done it in a way that is careless. They have been very intentional about making sure that their leaders are formed and understand that deep history and that deep calling that dates back to their founders, so that those lay leaders go through formation programs, months and months of this, and then start to really live and breathe what their ministry is about. And that's what we need in the psychedelic community. We need new players coming into this space to understand the deep history of these medicines, the deep traditions that they hold. We need to understand the deep sacrifices in time and resources and sometimes lives that have made the mainstreaming of psychedelics possible. And it's for that reason that I'm incredibly excited about tomorrow's panel discussion or presentation from Liana Galuli and Kat Konauer, where they're going to be speaking about the North Star Ethics Pledge. because that is a place where we can all look to understand what is it that we're grappling with here, and what do we really need to be thinking about as we look to bring these medicines to the world. I'm going to pause there because I think we get to the heart of this. I certainly have a lot more to say. My background, of course, is on the delivery side, and I'm here with Fourth Road Health to help prepare the field and help build out the delivery system and the infrastructure that's going to be necessary. And as I think about that, I start to think about, as we're building this, we've got to be intentional about what the right business models are going to be so that we can carry our ministry or our charism. We won't use those terms in the psychedelic community necessarily, into the future in a way that feels right for us. And then in that process, I think it leads us to really need to be very intentional about every decision that's being made right now that is ultimately going to trickle its way down to the delivery of this care to patients. Every single decision, whether that's a patent filing on a drug or a business model that is rallying up investment with high expectations of returns. We have to think about this, and we have to think about what is really important to this community. And the final thing I'll say, and then I'll hand it back, is that I think we've got to be thinking about the key learning that's coming through for me. Excuse me, I don't want to speak for everyone, but the key learning that has come through for me in spending time really making the rounds in the psychedelic community, spending a lot of time with a number of stakeholders, is this true concept of stewardship. And for me, that concept of stewardship is coming clear in three places. Number one, obviously, we have to be committed to delivering these medicines in a very high quality and safe manner. Number two, we really should be committed to advancing and sharing the knowledge and wisdom that comes from these medicines, with that commitment to open science and open praxis. And then number three, we've got to be committed to affordability and accessibility. And that's what this panel is about today. And I look forward to unpacking it further. And I'll pause and hand it back.
Thank you so much, Gregory. They're really, these are big questions that are being asked, and a lot of them are really future focused, but it's amazing if you just think about the last 5 years. And I often think about this in just the psychedelic space and the drug policy space and all these spaces. We've moved forward in these 5 years much more than we did for 30 years. And that's incredible because it means that we can actually have these conversations, not thinking about them so much in the future, but really being grounded in what's already happening. So we're going to invite up Brian Anderson, who is going to be moderating the question and answer part of it. He's a psychiatrist at the University of California, San Francisco, where he studies psychedelic medicines. He's been a member of the Núcleo de Estudios Interdisciplinarios sobre Psicoactivos since 2006, and it currently is a member of the board of directors of the Chacruna Institute. Over the past decade, he's conducted ethnographic research with ayahuasca religions, 12-step recovery groups, and other communities of people who use drugs in North America, South America, and Europe. And I had the great honor of having him stay with me when he was doing his work in Mexico. And so we're really excited that he's going to be kind of holding this space as we go deeper into the conversation. So thanks a lot, Brian, and welcome.
Thank you, Zara. It's a pleasure to join the panel and to moderate. We're getting some great questions from all the participants. We're going to be going through these. I would like to start with a question that I think will touch on a few topics in the proposed questions. And this question is really to try to get the panel to engage with each other a little bit and help the audience learn a little bit more context and details about these different models you're talking about. Again, the name of this panel refers to the landscape of medicalization. We touched on there's a number of different ways of doing this work: for-profit, nonprofit, delivery systems set up in different ways. And then again, even that distinction, for-profit and nonprofit, it's not that black and white. There's many subtle in-betweens that I think we can flesh out. But I was wondering if each of the panelists could briefly start and point out some critiques or concerns about the field that you know best and that you work in. So if you have done drug development in the nonprofit area, what are the problems that you can share, the obstacles that that field needs to overcome to succeed in developing psychedelics? If you work in the for-profit area, what are the limitations that you see? Greg, you gave us a very impassioned sort of presentation of what things can look like within a religious healthcare system. What are problems regarding maybe evangelism and psychedelics and what that might look like if this rolls out? Not just the benefits of virtue and how we hold space and the benefits. I'd love to see what you guys can share with each other and the participants about limitations and goals that you have for addressing those.
Great. I'll jump in first. Having founded and run 2 nonprofit pharmaceutical companies, I'll say it's pretty tough to imagine a sustainable business model as a straightforward 501c3 entity. So I interpret your question as once we go beyond drug development, because drug development is not a function of the corporate structure. Drug development happens or doesn't because of the people who do the drug development. But the company owns the medicine. So what is that company's viability, right? Sustainability, ability to scale and reach impact. So we talk about affordability and accessibility. I would say for whom, right? Is that for Americans, or do we want this to go globally? And how hard are we going to work on that? So sustainability is a big challenge. There are tax consequences, which is one of the reasons that in my second company, MAPS, spun out a for-profit entity that is owned. So that's still sticking with the black and white, nonprofit and for-profit. There is a grayness in the business world. It isn't recognized by the IRS. But there are alternative business structures, which are hybrids, which are in various states, many states right now. So we can blur that. But moving toward a real discussion of commercialization and scale, and affordability and all the good things that I think we can all agree upon is something that is, I find, and I have found in my 20 years of doing nonprofit drug development, is a bit of a challenge for just nonprofits. It's not a criticism, it's an observation.
Thank you.
I'm happy to hop in here. I've worked almost exclusively in the for-profit sector, and I'm the first to admit that there are challenges and perverse incentives that are created within corporations. I think a lot of those challenges and perverse incentives are created in all organizations. It's some aspects of human nature in some ways that we get misled. And truthfully, in some of the nonprofits that I've volunteered with or have been close to, the level of politics and personal interrelationship challenges are actually much more severe than some of the corporations that I've had. So, I think it really comes down to trying to identify what are the concerns around for-profit enterprise that are trying to be protected against through nonprofit efforts, and really focusing on those tangible outcomes of what we're trying to prevent. Instead of focusing on the structures. And structures are inherently fluid. For-profit companies can do a lot of wonderful things, and for-profit companies can do a lot of terrible things, and not-for-profit organizations can do a lot of wonderful things, and they can also do some terrible things. So I think you just need to focus on what are the challenges we're trying to solve, what are the issues we're trying to prevent, and recognize I'm a lawyer by training. It's really hard. Really, really hard to structure rules and regulations in a way that don't just create new perverse outcomes. I see it every day with the laws and regulations that come out, that it just creates weird outcomes. And so that's one of the really big challenges, which is, at least in my experience so far within the psychedelics industry, and I'm certainly not as versed in the industry as many of the people at this conference and certainly on this panel. But But the people I've met so far, even the ones who have probably the worst reputations within the industry, all seem to be motivated by the right intentions and want to do it the right way. Sometimes they're restricted because the nature of the discourse that they have to participate in, particularly within the FDA confines, means that they have to say certain things that they don't necessarily personally agree with. So on the basis of that, and the people I know so far who are working within the industry so far, and I think leading it on the industry side, on the for-profit side, I think there's always risks. I think things can always turn sideways, but I really feel like it's being set off on the foundation of the right foot, and people are really trying to do things the right way, which is make sure these medicines are safe, make sure they work, and find a way to make them accessible. And, the people doing it, at least within our organization, believe that the for-profit model is the best way to achieve that. Not that there's anything wrong with not-for-profits or academic work or anything along those lines. Truthfully, I think all of those working in sync are going to be essential to bring the most impact out of this. But like I said, I think we really have to think about what are the concerns, that we're trying to address, and try and focus on them instead of talking about structure per se.
I'll hop in. I'm actually going to piggyback on something Ronan said, and then I'll come back to the evangelization question. So I actually really appreciate what you said there, Ronan, particularly around we probably can't just figure this out with a bunch of rules and regulations. Like, this is the rules we have to play by. These are the rules of the road. People need to understand this, and then we need to bring people to that understanding as new people come into the space. And I think there's an opportunity to do that, including with investors, right? So there are multiple ways to finance things, right? There's debt, there's philanthropy, there's equity, and there is an entire sector of social impact investing. And I think right now, with the state of the world that we're in, the social impact investment world is going to just start heating up, because we are at a place where we need new solutions in so many sectors, including the mental health and healthcare space, as the world melts down around us. And we got to be looking at all sources of capital. And we need to be having conversations about what are reasonable returns. Don't be eyeing something. Don't come into a place and be like, that's the next big thing. I'm going to make a ton of money off that. That's not what we're interested in this community, I don't think. I mean, a lot of people are not. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think it's about education. It's about that formation and understanding of what's important to us. And it's that bringing folks in and under the tent. I'll go to the next piece. So yes, I've worked in Catholic healthcare, structured as nonprofit. And, there's some critiques in that, right? Even in not-for-profit health systems, we have to act in some ways, in manners that are competitive and that lead us to be able to have a margin at the end of the day, because without that margin, we will not have any way to deliver on our mission. And so we find ourselves oftentimes in markets where we're up against a for-profit player, and that for-profit player is taking actions like, taking us to court, trying to block us from adding new hospital beds or new equipment or whatnot. And we're wasting tons of money in that process, but we need to do it because that's how we're going to build, right? As opposed to us coming to a better understanding of what the heck are we all here for? We're here to deliver health for communities. And that's where the healthcare system has kind of gone awry. And I think we have an opportunity right now, as we're building this sector, to throw all that out, learn from those mistakes, say, what are we not going to replicate? What fights are we not going to replicate? Because every single dime that we put in the wrong places will trickle down to the patient and not make this accessible and affordable. Doesn't matter where the financing came from. It's about the behaviors, and it's about the behaviors that are incentivized or not. On the question around evangelization, this is a question for the field, and plenty has been written about this. But I think obviously, number one, we have to just always remind ourselves psychedelics are not a panacea. Number one, obviously. And number two, they're not necessarily for everyone. And so, as I go out and start talking to people in the healthcare sector, which quite frankly, a lot of folks in the healthcare sector aren't paying attention to this yet, which shocks me a bit. And then when I do start to talk to them, it has to come down to the science, and it has to come down to the facts. And then we have to be like, as long as it's based in that, then you're not going to be coming across as an evangelist. You're coming down with facts and science, and that's what healthcare people are going to react to. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you, everyone. There's a number of questions on intellectual property. So, and this is always a sticky issue with psychedelics, whether it's about the use of compounds, people trying to gain patents or restrict use when, for instance, it's a botanical substance that has originated from a traditional or an indigenous community or communities. But it also is very relevant to synthetics in the form of, questioning what's the role of open science, how much has the industry or the research world right now learned from decades of nonprofit sponsored work and just community knowledge outside of traditional settings. And there's people asking, what are each of the panelists' takes on intellectual property and how does that play into these different models? Specifically, there was a question about maps. So I wonder if Victoria, if you could start off and just explain what's the situation there. And then maybe we can have also just a larger discussion on these tricky issues around botanicals and cultures of origin, how that plays into here too.
Sure, thank you. MAPS's position on patents and IP, and the board's position, with the exception of me, is that MAPS will not patent anything associated with medicines that they develop. And this is a closely held and cherished position, so I do not believe that that's going to change. And I can understand the reasons for it. MAPS is very sharing, the leader of the field, just incredible vision, and let's bring medicines to the world. My view on this is that patents are a tool, and to make a full-out claim that we won't patent anything, I think could, in the end, turn out to be a problem. So I like to reserve the opportunity to patent in the future if we care to. Then the issue is, well, are we denying access to anyone? And it's the patent holder's right to license the patent for $1 a century if you care to. I mean, it's basically free for access. There are other models within the pharmaceutical sector, which I know best, which evolve a dosage form to allow exclusivity to continue and therefore prevent generic competition from coming in. And those are a bit more controversial. Does that answer your question, or was there more to it, Brian?
That definitely helps for MAPS, but you talked about MAPS and patenting. Can you also just give us a little bit of information on the difference between that and data exclusivity and how that plays into business models? Because that's very relevant for MAPS too.
Right. So I believe that everyone in this community is supportive of exclusivity that FDA approval brings. And that's very important for going to the sustainability aspect of any of our business models. So exclusivity can be accomplished in a couple of different ways. One is sequential indications, right, that follow on from a primary indication. There can be clinical trials that are done with a new dosage form, and they're all a good thing to allow a company to exist and therefore to put its mission out and bring forward its vision for medicine and healing in the world. And that exclusivity obviously has financial, right, returns that come with it. That's the reason to have it. Yeah, with regard to botanicals, that, the U.S. Patent Office and many patent offices don't issue patents. And should we pursue them in the botanical space? Or do we make modifications, whether they are even slight modifications in patent? The pharmaceutical industry often develops what's called Me-Toos, METOOS. And those are compounds which are similar, very similar in structure. There may be a hydroxyl group or a methyl group, let's say, added. And many of our psychedelic substances are very similar in structure. And some of us are actually developing Me-Toos, except that nature developed them all.
I would, a couple of thoughts. One is when it comes to patenting, fundamentally, there's no real difference between a patent and the data exclusivity that the FDA can award. It's all a granting of some sort of monopoly that stops other people from participating in that space without your permission. And the truth is it's not easy to get a patent. People think it's really easy to get a patent through. It's really, really hard to get a patent through. In this case, and probably the subject du jour is the IP that I think Compass Pathways has sought around their form of psilocybin. And we should be clear, as far as I know, it's not the original botanic form of psilocybin. They've done work to modify it, and the patent is just a different form of exclusivity that lasts longer, admittedly, than data exclusivity. I think net it ends up about 12 years by the time you go through all the FDA process to get approval to put your drug on the market. So it ends up being about twice as long as the data exclusivity that's granted through the FDA. But the functional benefit is exactly the same, which is you then get to decide how to monetize it, which is you could give it away for free if you want, or you could look to earn a return from it. And so I think that needs to be understood, because I think people often misperceive the filing of a patent and the granting of a patent to be very different things. But the other thing, and this is why I think everything gets incredibly complicated when you think about the rules, is that one of the points Gregory talked about was talking about how, in I guess some of your experiences, you've ended up in litigation over the number of hospital beds that you wanted to have, which to me, to be clear, sounds like a ridiculous litigation fight to have. That being said, it's that system, that legal structure, which in this particular case around psilocybin, may actually lead to psilocybin not being patented, because as far as I'm aware, USONA and Compass Pathways are in a patent fight right now. So that whole legal structure that may facilitate litigation and what may seemingly be stupid fights may actually, in this situation, serve the benefit of everybody by ensuring that something that people perceive as being a botanical or for public benefit is accessible to all. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying, as you start to understand the complexity of all the different dynamics between drug development, court systems, patent law, and IP law, it's really hard to come to a uniform, coherent, and consistent set of rules that everyone can comply by, because you may again create unintended consequences. But certainly I'm of the view that when it comes to botanicals, and I think by and large the IP system, the USPTO, and certainly in Canada, you don't get to patent botanicals. So I think there's probably over concern around that, and then that is probably hyped up, but is probably may not, I can't say probably, but may not be as valid as some people think.
Greg, any thoughts on
Not this is so yeah. Patents in the drug development side are certainly not my area of expertise. I can only apply thoughts on how it trickles down into the delivery system. So while I can certainly understand Ronan's argument, particularly around certain of the patents right now that are in litigation, I think I do look at some of that and it's like, well, if we didn't file those patents, then some of the, I'm sure thousands and thousands of dollars in legal fees that are being spent here could otherwise be paying for more therapists to be trained, or for us to potentially have, dollars to get access to someone that can't afford the therapy, right? And, so I look at some of these things and I look at some of them as necessary evils. And that's the case in the delivery system side too, where we've had to deal with, certificate of public need laws where, I'm trying to file for the addition of beds, or I'm trying to, add a CT scanner, an MRI scanner, all these very expensive pieces of equipment where state legislatures have tried to regulate their ways around reducing, waste in the healthcare system in the United States by, saying, all right, we're only going to allow X number of machines in any given area for these kinds of populations, this demand, et cetera. And, we find ourselves justifying that and then going into court because the for-profit player doesn't want to agree with our numbers. So, yeah, I don't know. It's largely inefficient. And there are so many examples of that in the healthcare system of where the delivery system itself is just a pass-through entity, right? We are the pass-through entity for the very high cost of education. We're a pass-through entity for the cost of drugs and the margins that, the pharmaceutical companies are making. We're a pass-through entity for the cost of our real estate, for our equipment. And at the end of the day, we're lucky, at least on the not-for-profit side, if we're making 3 or 4% margins, which isn't a lot of money to reinvest in your company when you're running, buildings and equipment that, cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build and to maintain. And so, it's challenging. And the final thing that I would say, the one other pass-through, right, of course, is a very inefficient insurance system. Where we have insurance companies that are fighting us tooth and nail of whether or not they're going to pay. And we have, huge layers of administrative burden just to do that. And so the psychedelic community is actually quite lucky that we actually have someone that right now is working to get through all that noise. And that's Leah Mix, who's working to launch the Anthea insurance product, where, she's spending time with the psychedelic community to understand what is needed and moving at the speed of trust to make sure that insurance product, as it comes to market, is going to cut through that noise and not make sure that inefficiency gets delivered into the system that we're building.
There's a lot of challenges and obstacles ahead. We've talked about cost, time, just regulatory issues. What is keeping medicalization going in this time when there's a growing interest in decriminalization, non-medical developments, either on the religious side or maybe state laws allowing access through not going through FDA, but through other channels? What is going to keep paying these bills for drug development? What's going to make people want to go to doctors for this versus doing it on their own? What's going to keep the medicalization afloat?
It's because our initial indications are psychiatric, and people often see psychiatrists. How many people ask their doctor, "What do you think about this new medicine? I read about it. I heard about it. May have been in the media, wherever." So going through the FDA in order to medicalize these, first of all, that is a legalization path, but it's also a path of awareness and a path to educate or re-educate. We have some re-education to do here. I, in my second company, developed an intrauterine device, and we had an issue with educating people about the safety of intrauterine devices because of the Dalcon shield. So where all IUDs were taken off the market in the United States in very big lawsuits. So there are parallels in other sectors, in this case, the reproductive health sector, where there was a bad history in the courts that we had to overcome. And many, many people didn't even know that IUDs exist and what is a long-acting reversible contraceptive, and that they're as effective as surgery for sterilization. We have something that is similar here, where we actually want to educate the medical community, and we want insurance to pay for these medicines. So I see awareness, education, re-education, all as a good thing, because of where we are in time right now. 20 years from now, I hope we're in a different place, but right now, I think it's spot on.
Yeah, I would say that I think there's definitely a huge role for the health system to play. I mean, if I think about the healthcare consumer, the average healthcare consumer, and where they're putting their faith and trust, the average person is looking at these medicines, which, we've got a huge re-education effort to do as to like, are they safe? Why would I ever put that in my body? Right. And they're going to want to know what doctor said that was okay to do and what reputable institution are they attached to. And so the psychedelic community is incredibly fortunate that we've had really big names like Johns Hopkins, Mass Gen's coming into the game, UCSF, where you're from, Brian, NYU and Imperial College, et cetera. Really, important names in healthcare have allowed for this research to occur. And the psychedelic community has sought those folks out. And we are lucky because we can point to those institutions and say, we're not making this up, right? And so over time, absolutely. And I think, the exciting thing is we have decrim movements happening alongside of the medical movements. And ideally, we're going to see multiple channels where people can access these medicines, both within the healthcare system and outside. But what the education that will be needed is basically an education of what are your options? Which one feels more comfortable to you? And how do you know that you're safe in both? That's most important, right? How do you know that you can go in either of those places and you are going to be well taken care of? And that's where we as a psychedelic community can make sure that we have a community accountability to ensure that that's the case.
I 100% agree with Greg's last comment. Coming out of the medical cannabis industry with Canadian cannabis clinics. Now in Canada, we have a different healthcare system, so this is a little bit specific to Canada, but we have worked with over probably close to 150,000 Canadians, which is a big chunk of people for a country that's about the size of California. And the vast majority of those people came because they wanted the doctor oversight of cannabis. But these were cannabis products. They weren't single molecule, well-defined pharmaceuticals. They were plants, quite literally, that had to be self-titrated, that were different, compositions every single time. But people wanted medical oversight. And, from my perspective, I think a couple of things. One is, I expect you're going to see two overlapping hybrid systems, one purely medical that's purely synthetic, and one that's more wellness focused, that's accessible to anyone, provided you don't have a contraindication, much like is being proposed in Oregon with the psilocybin services initiative, which we're big supporters of. We think it makes a lot of sense because, like I said, the FDA process isn't perfect. You could see a drug like psilocybin, which probably everyone on this conference would think is reasonably safe and very effective, not get approvals because the process through the FDA is rigid and imperfect. And so having parallel tracks to legalization, I think, makes a lot of sense. But is there a need for a medical market? Yeah, absolutely. Because people will want it. And I think at the end of the day, at least one of my motivating philosophies is that we should respect people's autonomy, which is if they want to go to a doctor and have a purely medical experience, then fantastic, go that route. And if they want to explore a more personalized, less medical route, then great. As Greg said, as long as it's safe, as long as people can trust that whatever path they're going down, people are well informed and can minimize the risk, because again, these are not zero risk molecules, but minimize the risk and maximize the benefit, then I think that's the best outcome. And we should be supportive of every avenue that gets there, I think.
Brian, may I add one more thing?
Please, yeah.
Follow on, the great discussion here. Thanks, Ronan and Greg. The FDA has a pathway. It's called RX to OTC switch. That means prescription to over-the-counter switch. And there are a couple of requirements that are needed that must be achieved. One is that patients or people know when to take the medicine, what it's for, and they know when not to take the medicine. So contraindications or safety issues. But a third issue, which is a problem here with these medicines, it could be a challenge for that pathway later in time, and that is that these medicines cannot require the working with a health professional. And we are pursuing medicine-assisted psychotherapy. So we're saying psychotherapy is required. But I just want people to know that the FDA has a path within it to lead to demedicalization, right, to over-the-counter status. So this is not for further detail now, but just FYI.
Thank you, Victoria. And you just touched on something that for me has really been on my mind, hearing the panelists talk about access and how things will be rolled out and delivered, is this issue of drug-assisted psychotherapy. And we've talked a lot about FDA. A lot of us are in the United States, not everyone, obviously. Thanks for joining from Canada, and there's folks at this conference from other countries. But this overall issue of pairing a drug with psychotherapy has a number of challenges. This would not be, at least for the FDA, this would not be the first time that a drug potentially were approved in conjunction with a behavioral therapy. That's happened in the US. But can you all speak from your own perspectives what you see that's interesting or challenging about a drug-assisted psychotherapy being approved and then delivering that? Because we already know it's hard enough to access mental health care in the community right now. It's really hard to access psychotherapy, to get that paid for, to afford it. But since we're going to require that in the approval, how do we actually make this accessible to people?
I'll hop in. I think that's the greatest challenge that we're all facing, right? I don't think anyone has a perfect answer to it. The biggest challenge with, I guess, the drug-assisted therapy aspect of it, challenges are twofold. One is cost, which is when you have a therapist who I think everyone would want to be well qualified and well trained and knowledgeable, you're going to have a lot of labor costs. You're going to have a lot of man hour or person hours of someone sitting with you and working through it and doing the integration. And that inherently leads to cost and expense. And that's one of the big challenges with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. The other challenge is consistency, which is as long as therapists are individuals and persons, they're subject to biases, they're subject to perspectives, they're subject to different education, and so it's going to be incredibly difficult to lead to consistent outcomes. Whereas with just conventional drugs, especially if it's a single molecule that gets FDA approval, typically the outcomes are well understood, the side effects are well understood and modeled. And here you have so many factors and so many variables, it becomes impossible to ensure consistency. And so we don't have great answers. I think one of the things that for-profit entities probably have a little bit more liberal access to be experimental, to try new techniques, to find ways to innovate, because we're strongly incentivized to do so. And not to say that nonprofits are not similarly incentivized, but I think nonprofits also have a higher degree of scrutiny because of their status as nonprofit, and as charities, I think they're held to a different standard, rightly or wrongly. And so I think one of the advantages that for-profit entities bring to the table is the ability to innovate, because that's part of the expectation of what for-profit entities do. But yeah, I mean, this is the challenge. This is the big nut that everybody's trying to crack, and I think we've just got to start doing it. And I think, as I think is evident on this panel, it's doing it with the best of intentions, with the highest of ethics, and then just keep trying, and learn as we go. And unfortunately, there'll probably be mistakes along the way, and there will be bad outcomes. But hopefully we could minimize them, and really deliver a significant impact to, literally every person on the planet. I think could potentially benefit from psychedelics. So that's why I'm here. That's why we at Field Trip are here.
I've got 3 points I would make on that. And I think building on what Ronan just said, I think doing it, getting to work is right. And we're fortunate that we've got some really committed, dedicated therapists that are already just saying, look, we're going to get to work. I've recently joined the board of the Sage Institute in Oakland, and they are getting to work, and they're figuring out how do we start serving people of color, LGBTQ populations, and folks that are operating at the margins with proper sliding fee scales. And they're doing it in a manner that's going to require some philanthropy for the time being. But guess what we're going to learn? We're going to learn so much in the process of just getting to work, so that we can start to understand what is this going to take, so that we can then prove the business models and understand what we need to be advocating for as we look for insurance coverage. Another group here in New York, the Nautilus Sanctuary, going to be doing the same thing. We've got to help them figure this out. And so those therapists that are stepping forward saying we want to be part of the solution, Fourth Road is especially committed to figuring out how we figure out your business plan so that we can make your vision a reality. So that's why I'm in the space. I think that the community is being given a crazy gift through this. We shouldn't use the word crazy in this world, excuse me. But a really interesting gift through the coronavirus epidemic, and that is that the focus on mental health is front and center right now. We've got, I was just perusing a McKinsey article earlier today that was really talking about like, hey, it's time to really focus on mental health. Tyler Norris just put a really great op-ed from the Wellbeing Trust in the Hill the other day, really saying the time to invest in mental health is now. I mean, the conversation is there. And I think the psychedelic community has an opportunity to ride this wave and make sure that we're getting support. And I think we should be looking at getting that support in as many places as possible, advancing things as quickly and safely as possible with the FDA, advancing things with our investors to figure out how do we get money tied to the right places. That is the gift that we are being given. And then the final thing that I'll say there is, as it relates to insurance, we are dealing with a segment of the industry that has not reimbursed people well, to the point that a lot of our therapists choose not to participate in plans, and rightfully so, because they're not getting compensated for their time at a reasonable rate. And that's a shame on us. And so that was my realization. When I left my last job back in March, I went down to Cabo, spent quite a bit of time in my head with some LSD, and came to an understanding of I can't just keep building the parts of the healthcare system that make the money. I need to go to the sector that is really requiring the most attention, and that's the mental health space. And we got to get these people money, and we have to figure out how to build them businesses that are going to sustain them, because we have a lot of people that need help, and that's what we're doing. So, I think we've got a lot of really smart, dedicated people in this space that are trying to figure it out. And I think we've got to prove the models. We've got to think about it comprehensively too. We can't just look at what's the mental health impact, as I laid out in my recent article in the MAPS Commercialization issue, the Spring Bulletin. We've got to think about what's the true impact across the entire life of this patient, on both the mental and the physical health outcomes. Because if you think about folks with mental health issues oftentimes have major chronic diseases and higher morbidity rates in a number of different places, and that's costing us money, and it's costing those individuals the years on their life, years of productivity and being able to thrive in community, and that's a cost to all of us in our society, and we've got to figure this one out.
This is a great discussion. So just a couple of points. I want to be sure to speak of group therapy. We're doing a very different approach with MDMA and psilocybin. Ayahuasca, as envisioned, will enter with group therapy. That's the way it's done in various parts of the world, and it works really well. So moving in that direction is important. Something that I learned recently, because I'm just not associated with the lives of therapists, is that billing for multiple hours, more than an hour a week or whatever it is really a challenge too. And I would love to see us as a community that all have the same passion and vision as a movement come together and really move the insurance industry forward in terms of compensating therapists and help therapists to do this. I wouldn't want to violate any laws of companies coming together, and many of us are nonprofits, so we'll have to figure out how to do that. But that's very important to do. And let me say one more thing. It's brief, but it's a bit radical. And that is, if you look back to the 1990s, when HIV was recognized to be what it was killing so many patients with AIDS. AIDS activists and HIV patients, AIDS patients, basically knocked down the doors of the FDA and said, you need to evaluate our medicines differently. Please don't be so paternalistic. Actually, they didn't say please. And we're dying here, right? So what we want you to do is allow us to use these medicines, and it has to be faster. And FDA changed. Unbelievable. Breast cancer followed AIDS patients, okay? So there is a possibility here, and I'm not suggesting that we do this. We really need to coordinate and understand. But if there is some part of the system, I bring it up because change can happen, okay, when there is a movement, right? And the mental health crisis that we have, really, we can garner that and carry it forward and be very powerful and forceful. But let's decide and narrow what it is exactly that we want to do. And I see many of us sort of spread like this. We're pointing fingers at each other right now saying nonprofit, for-profit, oh no, we got to get over that. We all need to align in this direction.
Thank you. One of the questions that was asked by the participants in the audience relates to getting a botanical medication through FDA. And, this is a pretty unique panel. Victoria, you have an affiliation with an entity looking at developing a ayahuasca-based medicine. Ronan, you talked about the facility you're working with. Your company has started in Jamaica to look at actual developing mushrooms. What are the actual challenges, the nuts and bolts of taking a natural product, botanical or fungal-based substance through to regulatory approvals? Set aside the challenges of it being a Schedule I and a psychedelic, just getting a botanical or a natural substance like that through, what are we looking at as far as obstacles ahead? Many
is the answer to your question. Many. Can I just jump in with regard to ayahuasca? There is a botanical drug development path through CDER, Center for Drug Evaluation. So it's developed as a drug, but it is a botanical. And that means that there is another reviewer on the CMC, or Chemistry and Manufacturing Controls portions. I don't know about mushrooms in that they're not plants, right? But I suspect something similar would follow. So there have been 2 botanical drugs approved by the FDA. A recent Bloomberg article, you generally trust Bloomberg journalists, says that 500 plant or botanical drugs have been submitted to FDA, primarily from Chinese medicine. But 2 have been approved. One is oral and one is topical. So we draw from those, and we work with FDA very closely. It's about partnership. And I'll tell you, having been at FDA for 5 years, I've seen stranger products come through the FDA. And FDA, particularly when there is an indication that is for profound need and public health benefit, FDA really wants to be there. FDA does not want to be an obstacle. That's not their intention. They actually get pounded for doing that, right? So we can move forward in this way.
I don't have anything to add. I'm not the FDA pathways is not my area of expertise, so I will entirely defer to Victoria on those comments.
Okay.
We're calling upon crofelemer, which was the oral product from the Amazon for diarrhea. We're working with that team. The other is a topical green tea extract. We're not working with that team to learn what they learned.
Okay.
I'd love to share what we learned, by the way. Let's put that forward. We really do want to.
Yeah. Ronan, can you clarify, is your company looking at just then developing mushrooms not for the United States and in other countries, or is what you're doing in Jamaica more research focused and you're not actually thinking that you'll take it to Canada or Europe for being a medical product?
It's research focused for right now. Like I think I mentioned at the beginning, the hope is twofold. One is anticipating that you may see a market for for mushrooms as opposed to synthetics. Cultivation techniques and analytical testing are going to be essential for ensuring consistency of product with natural products, whether it's FDA approved or state legalization. So we're just trying to get ahead of the curve and understanding the cultivation. But the other piece of that is identifying novel molecules within psilocybin producing mushrooms and or formulations. Again, to understand a lot of our thinking, you have to sort of look through the lens of the cannabis industry and through the rigorous study of cannabis hemp over the last, call it 15 years, the number of interesting therapeutic molecules have gone from THC, which was never perceived as being therapeutic, but clearly has therapeutic potential, to CBD, which probably is ascribed way too many therapeutic potentials, to there's, I think, 130 or so minor cannabinoids that have now been identified, many of which have their own therapeutic potential, and which will likely lead to novel formulations, even if it's not a specific drug, but a formulation, a cannabis formulation or cannabis product formulation. And so the thought process is around that, which is, what are those other things that may affect the experience of psilocybin? Are there other psychedelic molecules in psilocybin producing mushrooms? Are there things that enhance, change, improve, shorten, lengthen, whatever the case may be, the experience, because there's any number of pathways to evolve those into new products. So it's not specifically about developing psilocybin into a natural product for approval. It's more understanding what else is going on inside those mushrooms, because they're fantastically complex, and they just warrant more research. And so that's one of the investments we're making.
All right. This may be a question more towards Greg, but anyone who has some thoughts on this is this issue of clinicians, right? This is going to be rolled out for clinicians to administer in different settings. What does that training look like? How does that really fit into these structures of delivering medicines? We talked about the approval part, but actually just getting people ready to deliver these drugs safely. We've all talked about there's serious risks here. So how are we going to get either medical professionals or a new type of professional ready to do this delivery in a safe way? And what structures are going to be needed for that?
Whew, that's a big question. And this is not my area of expertise. I'm only going to share kind of what I know. And what I know is being grappled with right now. So obviously, there are paths to training right now with the research institutions themselves to get trained to participate in the studies. And then we also have at least one academic program in the space at the California Institute for Clinical Studies, which recently, I think they just started on their 5th cohort of therapists. They've been getting around 70, 80 folks through each of their cohorts. But the numbers that we need are in the tens of thousands. And we are going to probably have some bottlenecks on the front side of this equation when the medicines get to the FDA approval. And I don't know that there's really a safe process to get around that necessarily, but there are people that are talking about this. I'm actually on the strategic planning committee for CIS as they're thinking about how to scale and grow their program. We have new players coming into the space like Ingmar Gorman, Elizabeth Nielsen, and Jeff Goss, who have started the Fluence entity that are looking to offer things and or offer that are offering training, but not necessarily to get you all the way to the point of being certified yet. And there are parts of the training process that are challenging in and of themselves, and including the fact that ideally we would like the therapist to have the ability to have a psychedelic experience and to actually utilize the medicine that they are administering for their patients, so that they have firsthand knowledge of what these medicines are. And that has been a challenge, and Victoria can probably speak to that a little bit more as it relates to some of the conversations that have been ongoing with the FDA to figure out how do we get around that. But it's a challenge, and there's a lot of folks that are trying to figure this one out. And I don't have the full answer. I would welcome my other panelists to lay it out from there.
It's a tough one.
From my perspective, I think we as a society have probably placed a far too big emphasis on purely academic pursuits. And especially when it comes to psychedelic and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, I think firsthand knowledge, whether experience with the medication itself or just in terms of like apprenticeship and chaperoning is probably one of the most effective ways to build, I think, the necessary army of therapists that are going to be necessary. And I say that based purely on my experience in the cannabis industry, because there were no programs, there were no manuals. No one as a physician in Canada really knew how to prescribe cannabis very well. And our medical director, Dr. Barry Weisglass, was as academic as he could be, as rigorous in a purely academic reading the literature kind of way. But at the end of the day, he had to learn on the go. And then he taught all of the other now 40 or 50 physicians who work in our clinics how to do it in the most rigorous way, expecting some degree of academic pursuit. But I think it's going to be necessary to be very hands-on. And I think there's going to need to be a lot of apprenticeship in terms of developing the most effective group of therapists as well as physicians to provide this kind of care.
And to just build on that piece, I should have said this as well. We're in this weird part, which is like, we also need to build the places where they can be offering it at the same time, right? So like we're trying to do all the things at once. And it's challenging to figure out how do we advance the research while doing the training and getting the infrastructure built. And we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah. And to follow on with Ronan and Greg, we are at the cusp now where we as a community used to be very worried about, could we take these medicines through FDA? Did FDA want these medicines to be developed? Could we raise enough money to develop these medicines? What kind of challenges were we going to have? We are really moving through that with multiple companies and several products now. And that means we're at a threshold. We're at the next level now where we need to put our heads up, come together and look at the bigger picture and work together. Sort of something that I would like to see is a little more, there is quite a bit of collaboration, but a little more work together and focus on what are our big challenges. A big issue with ayahuasca that we're thinking about is, the shaman or guide uses the medicine, right? So that was mentioned as one. What's the impact of group therapy and setting? There's been a bit of research on that. We'd like to have more. The setting itself can have an impact. It's very positive for most. So we're through kindergarten now. Actually, we're accelerating through grade school. But what are those bigger issues, and how can we come together as a community to empower academics to move forward and work for funding to benefit all of us and to move the entire field together, to advance this movement, as Ronan spoke of earlier.
The movement that you're talking about, I'll just share as someone who's spent a lot of time in communities where people do use psychedelics. I've been to Latin America and lived there. I've spent time in indigenous communities and I've seen how this is done in clinical trials. I have a concern, and I'm wondering how we're going to deal with this, is that when people have these experiences that change them fundamentally, how do they go make sense of that in a community when this is being rolled out as a medical intervention, and when often medical professionals will find this rather jarring, or this will be so unusual for them, or they will be rather uncomfortable with what they see when people go through these experiences. And I just have a question, is how are we going to create the context, as you guys have commented on, that will help people make sense of this in a helpful way, and that these treatments won't actually be, more harmful than good, given that this is going to be done in a very novel context for many places outside of Latin America or communities that have longstanding use? How do we inform culture and community and not just medical intervention?
Yeah, I think it's building community around this, right? And so, like, Mark Margulies actually wrote a really lovely article about this in Double Blind a few months ago, where he was describing a model he was calling Peach. And I forget what the E is. I feel bad. I want to say it's psychedelic education and community healing. I could be wrong about that, but it's about building community into this whole design. And I think we have an opportunity to do that. So as we're training therapists about what these medicines are and how to work with them, and as we're building out the delivery network, I think we have a real opportunity to make sure that the delivery network that we build plays an integral role in the communities that they're serving. So we shouldn't be, just dropping clinics in and then, waiting for patients to come to us and then putting them back out. We need to be taking a really active role in understanding what's going on with this patient, right? What's happening with all of what's happening on the mental, emotional, spiritual side, but what's happening on the physical, and more importantly, probably what's happening at home or out in community. What's going on with their housing situation, their food, access to healthy food situation, their job, et cetera, those social influencers of health. We need to be thinking about that whole person. And I think therapists are the perfect, folks to be helping assess that information. And if we can back them up with social workers and other professionals that can help them then navigate what is another layer of a complex web of other services in their community, while also engaging folks in process where they do have opportunities to learn from one another and share an experience. Like, we can build this. Let's build it the way we can, and let's teach the health system how to do it differently. We should be looking at these medicines as the introduction of these medicines, into the healthcare system as an opportunity to truly transform the healthcare system. And we can design it right from the front, on the front side. That's my thinking. Victoria, I think you were going to say something. I apologize.
We feel similar. So to save time. Thanks, Greg.
I think that was an awesome answer. I really have nothing to add.
Okay. We're coming up to the final minutes. Just a very kind of concrete question. And then I think we'll hear more about this tomorrow with our colleagues from North Star. But a few questions have been about, essentially corporate social responsibility. How do we engage with traditional communities? How do we, respect that a lot of the teachings, not just the plants or the substances, but the teachings of how to use these substances in a healthy way have come from communities that have not traditionally benefited from the expansion of psychedelic science. So what is corporate social responsibility from the for-profit and the nonprofit sector look like moving forward as this medicalization of psychedelics grows?
I'll hop in here as speaking, from a for-profit perspective, which is we don't have a perfect answer for what that looks like. I think the only place that we can start right now is to start with dialogue with these communities and their stewards and the people who are leading them, and figuring out what serves their interests best. I think there's probably a predisposition for people to, at least in North America, to sort of know what's best for these communities and kind of impose that. And I think that's entirely disrespectful. So start with dialogue and see what they tell us and go from there. And it's something that we're cognizant about at Field Trip. We don't have perfect answers, but we'll keep working at it as best we can to understand the considerations, work with the communities, and help all of us evolve going forward in a way that's mutually beneficial.
I would follow similarly and say we are very young with regard to this compared to cultures who've been using these medicines for hundreds of years. And we need to step forward actually with humility and really ask what is possible. We've been so focused on bringing these medicines through FDA or legalizing others, fundraising. And now we're getting to the place where incredible outcomes are possible, and to look to the beautiful, culturally rich and experienced communities that know what is possible, and ask them to guide us and teach us and help us to achieve profound outcomes and change.
I was a bad panelist and didn't have the question completely in mind that I was trying to piece it together with Victoria and Ronan's comments. Can you repeat or rephrase the question for me, Brian?
What's a good step towards corporate social responsibility, either for for-profit or nonprofit entities in this space? What do you see a good way to move forward?
Got it. Sorry. Thank you. A good step. I think a good step really is what's happening tomorrow with the North Star launch. And the reason I am putting so much emphasis on that is because of how the group that has gotten it to where it is for launch tomorrow has gone about their process of engaging folks in the design of what they're laying out. And so, they've engaged, many people from various different sectors, right? Everyone from elders in the space to, the researchers in the space to investors, to start to figure out like what's going to resonate with you as we look to build this community of accountability. And so I don't want to steal, obviously, Kat and Liana's thunder. I'm excited for them to deliver this to us tomorrow, but I think that's the step. And I think then it's incumbent on us, all of us, to take a look at that pledge, read it, see if it resonates, see if we're willing to sign on to that, and then bring more people to it. And it's goes back to kind of where I started the conversation, which is, what is this charism all about? If we were to borrow from our Catholic healthcare ministry folks, what is this all about? How do we teach others as they come to these medicines and to this work? And recognizing what Victoria said, we're learning too. So I think that's the proper next step is really engaging folks in dialogue and grappling with these questions, just like we're doing on this panel and all the other. There's many other folks over the course of these 2 days that are grappling with these same questions. And I think that's important. We have to do this. This is the work.
We have about 2.5 minutes to close this down. I want to say thank you to Zara Snap, who's in the background, who helped open this and has been moderating this whole track this afternoon. Greg, Victoria, Ronan, thank you so much for being here. In the last 2 minutes, any words that you want to share based off of your experience today?
We all still have our heads down. We're all working so hard, building our business models. Let's occasionally bring our heads up and have our movement in mind and check in with what we as a community really want to have happen. Let's be sure that we are aligned. Let's be sure we're not, pointing fingers at each other. We really do need to align. And then how are we going to make this really impactful and get to scale? That's a real movement.
I think I would just sort of end on a word that Victoria said, which is humility. It's actually a concept that I spoke with my personal coach and therapist about the other day. And humility is the ability to see the world anew every time, which means the mistakes we've made in the past don't necessarily mean there'll be mistakes in the future. And the things that worked in the past doesn't mean they'll work in the future either. So let's keep going forward with humility. Let's recognize that we don't have the answers, and let's do our best to work together to try and build something that creates the most amount of impact. Because I genuinely believe at least everyone I've spoken to so far in the field, in the industry, whatever you want to call it, is doing it for the right reasons. And so I think we have a wonderful platform to work from.
Yeah, I would just say I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be in conversation with the three of you, because I think that it's these kinds of dialogues that we all do need to be grappling with. And I'm so grateful that we're doing it. And, I'm so excited to be in conversation with lots and lots of other people around this. And so thank you just for making the time and allowing me to be here with you today.
We are now going to take a 30-minute break. This panel is over, and when we come back in 30 minutes, we'll have the policy panel speaking about regulation, decriminalization, and other policy efforts. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.